Welcome to this session, which is entitled The Power of Collaboration in Procurement, Lessons Learned from COVID-19. I'm sure there are many across the globe really, but today we're going to be focusing on specifically the area of procurement. Delighted to be joined by Kevin Draisey from North Yorkshire Council and by Simon Field from Wakefield. Between you guys, obviously you've got experience of the pandemic, both from your own council point of view, but also the regional bodies that you're members of, your membership of YPO as a public sector buying organisation, and the national advisory group through LGA. So you've got a kind of a hierarchy of different perspectives that I think will be really helpful. If we start off, just talk about what was it like working in a procurement team during the initial outbreak. How did you respond? What did you have to do quickly to mobilise your teams? Kevin, perhaps we could start with you on that one.
I think looking back, the overriding thing I feel from maybe sort of March until May was just it was very high stress. So I think we had, or at least it felt like we had some type of run-in where we knew that things were happening. We were getting briefings through work, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. If I knew then what I do now, there's certain things that we would have or could have put in place. But I think that initial period was just incredibly difficult and incredibly stressful. So I think in terms of working in procurement, on the one hand, that's really exciting to feel useful, required, a key part of that response. But I guess the processes, the game that we play changed overnight. The rules that we normally operate by changed. So it was a really difficult professional moment, but actually I think one that on the whole, I think we all stepped up to, but both as a council at North Yorkshire and also as a region at the Yorkshire and Humber. It was a difficult time, tricky. I'm sure Simon will feel the same.
Yeah, Simon, how was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Kevin has just said. It was really stressful to start off with. The uncertainty around, how long it was going to last, etc. But I think, I was in quite a fortunate position from my own services perspective because we were kind of already set up to work remotely. My team often worked remotely. So, and we'd recently as well, we're fortunately enough, we'd put in place, we'd refreshed our business continuity plan. With no hindsight or whatever, I think it was more by chance than anything, but we'd refreshed that and we do that on a yearly basis. So we were kind of prepared for, working remotely, what happens if we can't get into the building and that kind of thing. I think the thing that that took us by surprise, which was one of the things that Kevin's talked about, and I think this was one of the hardest challenges for quite a few people within the procurement service, was the rules had changed sort of almost overnight. As the policy notes started to come out from the government, and some of the challenges we were all facing across the region were sort of unprecedented, and it was, it was a test in time, stressful, but it was also, and I think it still is challenging and rewarding, and to see, that actually, that procurement was actually really important to delivering frontline services. And I think it was the first time that my service has certainly been thought of in that way in response to such a big event.
Do you think then that as a result of the pandemic and the crisis that you've just described, the role of procurement has risen up the tree? There's always this debate, isn't there, about procurement at the top table and whether or not we have a high enough profile in our professional careers. Kevin, do you think that has been enhanced through this?
I think it has, and I think on the one hand, I'm incredibly fortunate at North Yorkshire. Procurement is well regarded, so we are often involved in key projects and get a lot of exposure at a senior level. However, it was nothing like what we saw during the pandemic. We were involved and invited to meetings across the council, which we would just never have got to previously. And I think maybe some of those preconceived ideas around procurement which maybe certain ones held where it's just buying and it's dead easy. I think that was really knocked on the head by some of the challenges we faced, and when we could articulate, actually, global supply chains have seized up. The just-in-time procurement that we are all used to, and that we probably don't even pay attention to, has just seized. How do we solve this problem? That really got people's attention. So I think you're right. It can only have helped our cause in terms of the wider organisation seeing the importance of it.
Great. And that expectation that you've just described there, I mean, certainly we found that in our own organisation, that because we were procurement and a procurement organisation, everybody just expected us to have the answers and to have the stock available, and just, you know, call YPO, they'll be able to sort it out. Did you find the same in your own function, Simon? That there was just this huge weight of expectation?
Yes, exactly. And I think what helped us, as to Kevin's point, was that it was so widely publicised. You know, the collapsing of global supply chains, the restrictions on exports of items from China, you know, and it was very much that, and it helped our cause. But equally, I think you know, we raised our bar, and we met that challenge. And I think, you know, we speak with yourselves quite frequently with the YPO. We were looking to you for support, but, you know, we were fully appreciative of the situation and how it affected everyone in the supply chain. So your suppliers were not meeting their requirements to you, so we couldn't necessarily expect you to meet our requirements. And I know that other people don't necessarily see it that way necessarily, but we were very sort of mindful of that and respectful. And I think, you know, probably some of the things we might, you know, that we would talk about would be how we looked at being more collaborative and more strategic, because in the initial phases of the pandemic we were very tactical, all from, you know, across the region, and I'm sure Kevin will echo this sentiment, is that we were very tactical, and we were all spot buying and spot purchasing, for instance PPE, and just meeting those initial demands as best we could. But we all had that eye on the long game in terms of making sure we could find a surety of supply in the long run, and that's where we came together and collaborated. And I think there's some really good success stories and good examples and case studies that we could talk about amongst ourselves that we collaborated on as a group, you know, for the next couple of years. I think there'll be good stories, war stories to tell, you know, in future years. Scars
to show, definitely. So certainly some more grey hairs. Sorry, Kevin.
I wish.
The issue of supply chain that you mentioned there, Simon, and you know, as we've said, all three of us found ourselves faced with traditional supply chains that had just dried up, and we were facing around for alternatives to that. What was the temptation, Kevin, to compromise on quality or on price, or on, you know, the normal things that you would go through as part of a procurement exercise under the pressure to obtain supplies?
It's a really good question, that, and I think a lot of our public procurement processes are very structured, and we go through essentially becoming very familiar with those that are bidding. We get to know lots about them, their offer to us, but as we said earlier, essentially our approach was emergency and spot buying. So in lots of cases we were buying from suppliers who frankly we'd never met, never used before, we'd never come across, who were new to the market, and that pressure around is speed more important than quality. And I can think of a couple of occasions where we got to within a couple of days of running out of PPE at various early points, and that feeling of pressure from frontline services who needed it, and this was a matter of health and life and safety. That pressure was enormous, and that pressure to, do we take that risk with supplier A who we never knew of, and we're having to read a photocopy of a Chinese certificate? Do we know? Quite frankly, I didn't know much about masks before this, and very quickly I felt like I had to learn and read up on different types of masks and the bacterial filtration, But even then, you have to make a decision. We need the stock. Can we trust these suppliers? And it was difficult. Sometimes we did have to compromise and take risks, and that felt uncomfortable. We suffered one or two glitches, but in the main, we managed to steer our way through that and have done well. But yeah, it was a real challenge.
How about you, Simon? Did you find yourself having to compromise all of those procurement principles, or were you able to stick to your guns on that?
We drew the line at quality. We didn't cross the line, and it was a challenge, and we worked closely internally. We set up a new way of working with our health and safety team, where they would be, because they specialize in that, and they could understand the test certificates, etc., that were being presented with, and whether they were legitimate or not. So we didn't cross any boundaries on that. In terms of, it's a good point that Kevin made around the principles of what we assumed was value. Price was almost secondary. It wasn't even like the second thing on the list. It was about availability and making sure we had actually stock to distribute to the care sector, and that was our primary goal. So that quality and availability were our number one and two priorities, and then price was like a distant third. I will say that we did very well. We still the negotiation skills came to the forefront of quite a few individuals in the team, and they did relish the opportunity to have those sort of direct conversations that in normal circumstances we don't get the opportunity to have. So it did help some people within the team develop new skills and stretch them in ways they weren't anticipating, which is a positive thing to, I think, take from the situation. But yeah, it did put a lot of pressures on the service, and there was pressures from outside of the service, so internally within the local authority, where we were involved in one collaborative buy where we were days away from receiving a stock, and we just couldn't guarantee the quality of the merchandise, and we backed out of it. And that left us, similar to Kevin, we were probably a week away from running out of masks, gloves, aprons, etc. But it was the right decision, because if we were distributing substandard PPE and people are relying on that as a barrier to them contracting the virus, we can't afford to do that. And then we made the right decision. Fortunately, things worked out, and we did have another solution. So we did a couple of things. So we did the collaborative buy across the region, which was really successful, supported and coordinated by yourselves, the YPO. But we also did a large purchase through a national retailer, which again was partially supported by yourselves, which was just thinking outside of the box and looking at alternative solutions wherever possible, and that was welcome. The stock was very welcomed at the time. So yeah,
it's a really interesting point about that kind of flexibility and thinking outside the box, because I think, as you both rightly said, there are certain red lines that as procurement professionals we don't cross. But I think the whole country found itself suddenly able to do things that would have otherwise seemed impossible during a crisis. It was the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Do you think the procurement profession has learned from that? Because there is this perception, isn't there, of local government procurement as being very rigid, very long-winded, very inflexible. Do you think we've managed to break that myth a bit through this crisis?
I think I'll let Kevin go. Go on, Kevin.
Yeah, I think I always get quite irritated when people make out that private sector procurement people are more agile, more innovative, and can just get things done quicker, because I just don't believe that. I think the basic skill set of a procurement professional is exactly the same. And actually, I think the public sector came across really well in terms of our response to COVID. And I think some of the ways of working, and I think of some of the constitutional changes we made in line with some of the PPNs and in terms of our own procurement governance. We made changes to processes and delegated authorities in days and weeks that would have taken us months. For instance, we have one yearly review of our contract procedure rules, and it's very predictable. It tends to get to a head about now, actually, and we do a review, and then it goes through all of the committee stages. But it's a year-long process. We actually made some amendments in a matter of weeks, so that we could operate as we needed to. Now that is totally unheard of, and that just goes to show that when we need to, we can be agile and we can change the way we operate.
How about you, Simon? Were you able to tear up the rule book a little bit, but in a good way, in a constructive way?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think the PPNs helped us massively as a local authority to do that. It sort of enabled us. Obviously, still staying within the regulations as we could. Yeah, and I think it's brought about. I think some of the learnings from this and the ways of working, and we can see that in the next in the rules reform that's going to happen, and the green paper that will be published. I think there's a lot of learnings from the current situation on how the public sector procurement teams have reacted to this, and it's taken some of the positives, and I think they'll be embedded in the new rules moving forward. You know, simpler procedures, more opportunity to negotiate, etc. You know, I think that'll be learning. You know, there's some learnings there. I think there were some faux pas, though. You know, and I don't think it was all good from the public sector point of view. Definitely, I would say from a local authority point of view. But I think there were a couple of big faux pas in the press around, you know, purchasing logistics providers from, you know, Europe, and they didn't have any boats, and you know, buying the gowns from Turkey, and they just weren't fit for purpose. But you know, I think from our point of view and from a regional point of view, I think we on the whole we did a good job.
We talked about the procurement and the outcomes and the activity, but of course the outcomes produced by people. And both of you run reasonably sized teams within your own organisations. How did you find teams and individuals responded to this? I guess there's a lot of remote working had to go on, but also changes in behaviours, changes in how you manage people. Kevin,
yeah,
how's that for you?
I think Simon mentioned earlier the immediate sort of switch to our dispersed working model. Like Simon's authority, we were already working from home parts of the week, so that switch to the permanent home working actually went really smoothly. So we were all in the office. I think it was on the Monday, and from the Tuesday onwards, we were all working from home. And I think, as Simon said, that's testament to some of the things that we put in place beforehand, business continuity, some of our processes. I think what made lots of that more stressful at the time was the fact that we were dispersed. So some of that, there's things where maybe some of that collective thinking could have happened maybe a bit quicker if we were all in the office, but it just proved itself a different challenge. So having to meet virtually was new and was different, and video meetings, etiquette, how you would handle those things. But frankly, now it's normal now, and things have settled down. But at the time, yeah, it was different. It was a challenge. Staff also have their own stresses, and I think we were conscious at first of staff members who had family who became ill, or who were just generally anxious and conscious of it. I have a child who's seriously ill and is at risk, and these things can't leave the back of your mind. But you have to carry on and deliver the role that you need to do. But I think everyone, with all of that pressure, as I say, looking back, really did a fantastic job.
How about in your area, Simon?
Yeah, I think it was more, whilst we had the business continuity plan, I wouldn't say it was all plain sailing, because one of the things that we'd not anticipated was potentially, you know, as with most local authorities, we suffered some IT glitches along the way because of that. There's that increased pressure on people working remotely, and you know, the IT infrastructure within the local authority. But you know, all in all, we worked through those issues. I think what we struggled with as a team was, in the initial stages was setting up those forums to meet and to have that creative thinking, to make sure everyone felt like they had the support network around them and were able to do their jobs. And you know, and we did get there pretty quickly. You know, we did things like, you know, none of it's rocket science, you know, setting up WhatsApp groups, so if people are offline but still want to communicate with the team, they can do. We set up, you know, things like having a more light-hearted meeting that isn't necessarily business centered or business focused, and a business focused one in the week. And then we've also more recently set up something which is like a virtual office, whereby there's a couple of hours a week where, you know, the whole team can dial in. You dial into a video call, and it's just there in the background, and people can communicate freely as and when they would do, just as if they were in the office. So we're still trying to iterate. It's not a, you know, it's not a fixed process by any means, but you know, we're still trying to work through that and figure out how we can communicate more effectively.
How much of that do you think is likely to carry forward into the future? I mean, I noticed just today, I'm in the office, and it's one of my kind of 2 days a week that I tend to do in the office and 3 days at home. It looks like 2 of you are at home. Do you think that will become a regular working pattern going forward?
I think it will at North Yorkshire. We've had some discussions both within our team and then in our wider directorate at the council, that actually there's some real benefits for having that mixed approach to the office. There's some work-life balance things that really you can help level up when you have a bit more of a flexible view. And as I say, at North Yorkshire, we already had that in terms of home working. As Simon said, our technology has always been really good, and actually, other than one or two minor things, it's held up really well. So actually, I think it's proven that point to us, that actually being able to be more flexible around our office space, actually, that offers the council an opportunity around efficiency, and office space, better work-life balance. We are a big geographic county, so in terms of recruitment, it offers even some options to us where we could, rather than relying on how far someone could commute, we can have people work remotely and be able to deliver for us. So I think it's opened our eyes to a much different, better way of working.
The point about recruitment is interesting, isn't it? Because I think we've discussed many times in the past the challenge of recruitment for procurement professionals, particularly in the local government arena, is quite a small pool that you're fishing in when recruiting into this arena. Is that going to help us for the future?
I think so. We lost a key member of our staff, relocated back to Oxford probably about 12 months ago, due to sort of family circumstances. And I remember having a conversation with him. He said, look, I don't want to leave. I love working here, love the team. He'd been at the council a long time, but his family circumstance, and quite rightly, family comes first. So he was moving down to Oxford. And I guess something like this has proven that actually geography, when we have technology that works and we accept a dispersed model where some people will be in the office, some people will be virtual, it opens up whole new opportunities where it was an absolute certainty that he had to move and find another job. Actually, we might have been able to be a bit more pragmatic around a solution for him. So whether it would have worked, who knows, but I think it just gives us an opportunity to think a bit differently.
So talking of technology, we've got Simon back, which is great. So we were just talking about the challenge of recruitment traditionally, Simon, in the procurement professional network, and the fact that remote working gives us more flexibility in that arena.
It does. You know, I don't anticipate though that we will be fully remote working. So I think there's still that need for, you know, there's still that need to come together and meet with your internal stakeholders, especially when you're working on some, you know, big procurement exercises. And I think, you know, I think that's still going to be there. But yes, I mean, it does potentially open up, you know, that, you know, new candidates who can travel a bit from further afield. But we do, and I think you mentioned just before I left the call, but we do pull from the same pool of people, the talent pool. it does feel like, you know, that, you know, people move from, say, one public sector organisation to another quite frequently, and I don't know what we do to necessarily stop that, or whether we should. You know, I think we are constrained. A lot of our constraints are around, you know, the financials and what we're able to do in terms of rewarding individuals and allowing them to progress within our own teams.
Yeah. How about the relationship with central government? We've talked about collaboration between various local authorities and the organisations that we're all members of. And Kevin, particularly, you sit on the National Advisory Group for LGA procurement. How have you seen and observed the relationship with central government and the work that they've done on procurement through this?
I think in terms of the relationship, it's been really positive, actually, because in the past sometimes there's been some friction between the central government approach and how we operate in local government. But what's been really positive about this, and I think particularly of the National Advisory Group, is just how we've worked really closely with central government. And I think doors have opened that previously we wouldn't have had. I was able to have and continue to have regular calls with MHCLG and their procurement and commercial leads there to understand local government. Now, previously that just hadn't happened. So this level of closeness and collaboration, I think, has been really good. And I think on the group, we've all noted that, and actually that's something we want to continue, because for as long as procurement policy sits within central government, well, there's no better way to influence it than to be close and work with them. And I think this has brought us closer together. We've been able to engage and directly input into the PPNs before they've come out. So again, just that level of collaboration that we just haven't seen before has been really useful, and it allows us to get the point across around some of the specifics for local government that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do previously. So long may that continue. Absolutely.
I mean, Simon, have you felt the same? There has traditionally been this tension between central and local government, hasn't there? And this, you know, this unwillingness by local government to be seen to be done to by the centre. Do you feel that is diminishing?
Yeah, definitely. And through, you know, the work that Kevin's been doing as our chair of the strategic procurement group, he's really facilitated that conversation, and that comes through with their attendance at our strategic procurement group on a regular basis. I think it's not only, you know, influencing the PPNs, but then also, you know, potentially, you know, definitely the rules reform and the green paper. I think, you know, we will see some of the, you know, the comments and advice that we've provided, you know, flowing through into that paper and document. So I'm really optimistic about it all, and I do think it's something that will continue after, you know, after the pandemic has passed. So yeah.
So if we turn to the future now, because we've talked about the part that procurement played during the height of the crisis, but hopefully anytime soon, touching wood like that, we're going to be getting into recovery phase and coming out of this and rebuilding a new normal. I know it's a well-worn phrase at the moment, isn't it? But I think everybody accepts that we're not going to go back to exactly the same situation that we were in. How do we see the part that procurement plays in the future? You're talking about the green paper and the new regs there.
Yeah.
How do you both see that? Are there positives and negatives that you see in the proposals for the future?
Yeah, from my perspective, and from our local authority here in Wakefield, in terms of, you know, supporting the recovery at a local level, the council do see it as one of the levers, procurement as one of the levers that can help and aid, you know, in terms of economic recovery of the local area. So we've, in the last sort of 2 or 3 months, and again, not with hindsight, but our previous procurement strategy actually ended at the end of March this year. So we've not really, and ideally in normal circumstances, we would have had a new one already set to go and approved by the cabinet, etc. We've just had ours approved by cabinet actually today, and it's been developed over the last 2 or 3 months in conjunction with you know, the social enterprises, etc., in the local district. You know, members have had input into it, other organisations, etc., internal stakeholders, and there's an increased and a renewed focus on social value. How can we increase our local spend? You know, the Wakefield Council spends £315 million on an annual basis with over 5,000 different suppliers. So we have we're in a really good position to support, you know, the local economy. So yeah, they do see it as a really important lever. And then on the flip side of that, there's another couple of things that, you know, another couple of headwinds that we're really facing, the country and the local authority. But in terms of, you know, climate change and the green agenda, you know, how can we support that from a procurement perspective, and, you know, sustainable procurement practices, and how do we embed those moving forward? And then also, you know, there's the uncertainty around Brexit and what impact and what role is that going to play, you know, in terms of its effect on local businesses, you know, and specifically in Wakefield, you know, it's a logistics hub. So, you know, it's going to have a significant impact. And, you know, what can we do from a procurement perspective in the councils and the local authorities' annual spend, you know, to affect things in a positive way.
Great. Kevin, looking to the future, what scares you about it and what encourages you about it?
I think Simon's mentioned some of the key points. Brexit and trade deals or lack of is something that concerns me. Price fluctuations. I think one thing COVID did prove is that over-reliance on supply chains, just in time, things just working, that's probably taught us some of the lessons that having no trade deal at the end of the transition period we might have only learned next year, when supply chains were stopped or things were stopped at borders. We've already experienced that now. So on the flip side, we now know what things are like when stuff gets stuck at the border. I think some of our PPE deliveries got stuck for a long time at ports for various reasons. We've experienced that, so we can certainly learn from it. I think on the other side to that, again, just picking up some that Simon mentioned, some of the things we've learned, one of the things I'm most proud of at North Yorkshire was our approach to supply chain resilience. So we set up a board, and we met every week at the start of this, just to make sure that we were ensuring our key suppliers were resilient in the face of some horrific challenges. And I think we've reflected recently that actually it was a really good call, but we're going to keep it going at the end of this pandemic, because one of the key lessons I think I've learned, and I suspected it all along, but I'm convinced now, is that we've never fully understood the complexity of our supply chains. If we're really fortunate, we got a good grasp of tier 1, but beyond that, tier 2 and beyond, it's probably just something that just happened and we didn't think too much about it. We need to understand more about our supply chains, data intelligence, how resilient they are. Brexit, again, is another reason why that's important. I think that's one of the best lessons I think we've learned, is that we need to push on into that area. And the wider council have really seen the benefit of that, understanding wider supply chain issues. We've often thought about procurement just as that process in the middle, that's quite a formal process. But the wider supply chain is a really interesting piece, and how important it is to the council. So I think as a lesson, it's proved some of the things we suspected, and it's going to remain a major focus for us moving forward.
And how about the regulations? You both touched on them briefly, and clearly post-Brexit, they're not going to be top of the agenda for government, but there is a green paper discussion going on already. Do you see opportunities from that? Do you expect dramatic changes from the current regulations?
I don't know we don't know what the exact detail looks like as yet. But we have been, the Cabinet Office has spoken to us and met with us on a number of occasions and said that, it will be more streamlined. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that it will be, because, if you look at, the GPA itself, I think is only somewhere in the region of between, I want to say it's about 35 to 50 pages long, the General Procurement Agreement. And then, you know, if you look at our public contracts regulations, they're substantially larger than that. So I think it'd be nice. I think they'll probably end up finding a middle ground, which will simplify things and, you know, enable us to be more efficient and more agile as a, you know, from a procurement perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if the green paper and then what comes of this in terms of the new regulations come 2022 or 23 turn out to be what we've been briefed on and what we've seen in terms of the proposition, I think it's quite exciting actually in terms of the simplification of the rules. But with that comes a challenge, because I think that there's incredible flexibility within the rules as they are now, but quite often people might hide behind it or just think, you know, I've got to follow the rules, but the rules can be pushed. So if we don't change our mindset, even though we bring in much more practical and flexible rules, if we don't change with it, that's a real opportunity missed. So I think, like Simon, we've had some really good sessions with Cabinet Office and challenge some of the thinking around some of the proposals there. And I think it's for us as procurement professionals to really grasp them and make sure we take lots of the lessons we've learned through this challenging period with the additional flexibility of these new regulations. And as Simon said, there's so many things we can impact on: social value, help for UK supply chains. There's lots of things we can get into if we use that flexibility.
So the only people, as you've said, who are going to make the change that you've described are the procurement professionals within the network. Do we think that we, as an organisation, as a country, invest enough in procurement professions and in the calibre of qualification, for example, in recruitment, in development? And clearly that would be a patchy answer across the piece. Where do we think we are now as a profession?
I think it's undervalued. So I think in terms of your question, is it invested in enough? I don't think so. Does it get the kudos it should? Again, I probably don't think so. When I think back to school, this is not what I wanted to do. So is there something we need to get back to think, actually, how do we sell it to school children? Is there anything better than spending someone else's money for a living? And I tell you,
who does actually leave school wanting to be a procurement professional? I'm still torn between spaceman or fireman. I'm not quite decided yet.
Yeah, but there's something to be said. It is an interesting career. It's challenging, as we said. There is something really complex around supply chains. So it is a really worthwhile career to get involved in. But that investment and that kudos needs to come with it. So I think, again, us as a network and us as professionals, we have a part to play in that. We can't complain, say we're not at the top table, and yet we don't do anything about it. So it's for us to shout a little louder about our achievements. And I think we've discussed this as a region, we've discussed it with YPO, how we can collaborate better to actually bring some good PR around what we do, because a lot of what we do, we don't talk about enough. So in terms of our COVID response, there's actually some incredible stories of good planning, good work, but we need to shout about it. We need to let people know what we've done. And I think once we do that, that will help build our profession.
I absolutely agree. Simon, do you think the kind of the raising of the profile that we've talked about already earlier on will help convince our owning authorities to invest in the procurement profession? Does it give us that opportunity and perhaps a bit of a lever that we didn't have before?
Definitely. I think with what's happened in the last few months, people don't just see procurement as a process anymore. They see it that actually it can really add significant value, identify risks within their supply chains. You know, I think as well, you know, going back to a conversation about, you know, the profession, I never saw myself as being a, you know, head of service or head of procurement. I didn't see that when I left university. And I think when I was a child, I wanted to be a rally driver, not an astronaut, but, you know. But anyway, that aside, yeah, definitely. I think it will raise our profile, and people can see that we can add value beyond it's just a process that people have to follow.
Great.
And yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Brilliant. So just to wrap up then, if you could both write yourselves a piece of advice back to yourself in March 2020, what would be the one piece of advice that in hindsight you'd want to appear on the screen in front of you?
That's a good one. Be prepared for things to go wrong, and don't worry about it. Just take action basically when they do, because taking no action is not an option really.
Excellent. Kevin?
Yeah, it's similar thinking. Act quickly and stand by your decisions. Simon mentioned something earlier which resonated. We stood back from the opportunity to be part of a collaborative procurement, and making a split decision can be quite a lonely place when it's on your head. It turned out to be the right decision. So I think it's that, just be confident and clear in your decision making and stand by it.
Excellent. So between the three of us, we've covered a lot of ground over the experience of collaboration in procurement during the COVID crisis. Thank you both very much indeed for your contribution and for your time.
Thank you.
That's okay. My pleasure.